What if the decisive factor in 2026 is not advanced weaponry, but human capacity? As the Russia-Ukraine conflict approaches its fifth year, the center of gravity appears to be shifting. Across a front line stretching more than 1,000 kilometers, endurance, not intensity, may define the next chapter. Personnel strain inside Ukraine's ranks is emerging as one of the most consequential variables shaping the battlefield. Reports of rising unauthorized absences, rotational fatigue, and mounting psychological pressure point to a structural challenge rather than a temporary fluctuation. In modern warfare, resilience is no longer measured only by hardware or financial backing. It is measured by the sustainability of the force itself. The most urgent question in 2026 may not be territory, but troop strength. As the war enters its fifth year, Ukraine faces a widening manpower gap that analysts say could significantly influence strategic stability along the active front. In October 2025 alone, reports indicated approximately 21,000 cases of unauthorized absence within Ukraine's armed forces. Public acknowledgements have suggested that as many as 200,000 personnel may currently be absent from their assigned units. Under Ukrainian law, such cases carry criminal penalties during wartime. However, enforcement remains complex amid operational demands and administrative constraints. Multiple brigades are believed to be operating below authorized strength, with some assessments indicating units functioning at roughly 30% manpower capacity. Officers describe compressed rest cycles, limited rotation opportunities, and prolonged frontline exposure contributing to cumulative fatigue. An amnesty initiative introduced in 2024 facilitated the return of more than 29,000 personnel, yet structural pressures have persisted. For Kyiv, the issue extends beyond numbers. It touches morale, cohesion within the chain of command, and the long-term sustainability of defensive operations. In a conflict increasingly defined by duration rather than rapid shifts, manpower has become a decisive strategic variable. What happens when momentum advances not in sweeping breakthroughs, but in incremental adjustments? Across southern and eastern Ukraine, the battlefield dynamic has evolved into a gradual contest of positioning. Open source tracking indicates that Russian forces expanded control incrementally in parts of Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia through late 2025, leveraging areas where defensive lines were under strain. According to assessments from the Institute for the Study of War, operational pressure has focused on probing vulnerable sectors and compelling repeated redeployments. This method does not rely on rapid offensives, but on sustained, measured pressure designed to test organizational resilience. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues reinforcing defensive belts along a front exceeding 1,000 kilometers. Stabilization efforts aim to offset rotation constraints within certain brigades. The broader strategic picture remains fluid. Neither side has achieved decisive dominance, yet localized shifts have gradually reshaped tactical maps. The defining characteristic is not speed, but persistence. In 2026, the contest may hinge on which side can preserve cohesion, maintain logistical continuity, and sustain morale under continuous operational demands. In prolonged conflict environments, endurance becomes strategy. Numbers alone do not determine outcomes, but they shape sustainability. As 2026 approaches, several Western assessments indicate that Russia maintains a structural manpower advantage over Ukraine, even amid substantial losses. Estimates published by The Economist in 2025 suggested Russian fatalities since the beginning of the conflict could range between 55,000 and 250,000 within that year alone. Despite these losses, Moscow increased deployed personnel in Ukraine by roughly 150,000 during 2025 through expanded recruitment incentives and contract enlistment programs. Analysts at the Atlantic Council and the Institute for the Study of War note that Russia's larger population base and centralized mobilization mechanisms provide deeper reserves for sustained operations. At the same time, they caution that long-term sustainability remains uncertain if elevated casualty rates continue. For Ukraine, the strategic equation is asymmetrical. While maintaining defensive cohesion, Kyiv must compensate for numerical disadvantages through advanced technology, specialized training, and consistent international support. The decisive variable in 2026 may not be short-term territorial movement, but the ability to preserve force generation capacity over time. In extended conflicts, Demographic depth influences strategic endurance. If manpower represents the pressure point, Western support functions as a stabilizing force. Ukraine's defensive durability increasingly depends on sustained political, financial, and security commitments from Europe and the United States. In January, leaders from approximately 30 nations convened in Paris to explore post-ceasefire security frameworks. French President Emmanuel Macron described the moment as historically significant, underscoring the importance of binding security guarantees. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reaffirmed that sovereignty and territorial integrity remain foundational principles in any future settlement. The proposed framework includes discussion of a multinational monitoring presence positioned away from active contact lines, expanded logistical coordination, and structured reconstruction planning. While no finalized deployment figures have been confirmed, France signaled readiness to contribute thousands of personnel under agreed international conditions. Security analysts emphasize that Ukraine's resilience in 2026 will depend heavily on the continuity of weapons transfers, training missions, intelligence cooperation, and macroeconomic stabilization packages. Without sustained backing, manpower constraints could widen. With it, Kyiv may maintain strategic balance long enough to strengthen its diplomatic position. In this environment, alliances operate as practical instruments, not symbolic gestures. At the same time, the battlefield itself is evolving. The front lines are no longer shaped solely by troop density, but by integrated systems of surveillance, precision targeting, and autonomous platforms. Unmanned aerial vehicles operate across multiple tiers, from small reconnaissance drones, providing real-time situational awareness, to longer-range systems capable of striking logistical infrastructure. Both sides deploy these tools extensively to adjust artillery coordination within minutes, accelerating operational cycles. In the maritime domain, unmanned surface and underwater systems have altered dynamics in the Black Sea. These platforms enable asymmetric operational pressure at lower cost than conventional naval assets. Biometric technologies are also being incorporated into security operations. The US-based company Clearview AI has confirmed that more than 18 Ukrainian government agencies have accessed its facial recognition database for identification and verification functions during the conflict. The integration of connectivity, data processing, and rapid intelligence dissemination has transformed decision-making speed. In 2026, the side that best integrates human resilience with technological precision may shape not only the pace, but the limits of the conflict's next phase. Looking ahead, the defining question is not whether the conflict continues, but how it evolves. Strategic forecasts outline several potential trajectories, each influenced by manpower sustainability, Western assistance, and political resolve. Research institutions, including the Institute for the Study of War, assess that the most probable scenario remains a prolonged war of attrition. In this model, front lines adjust gradually while both sides test endurance over time. Another pathway envisions incremental Russian gains if US or European military assistance declines, potentially widening manpower imbalances. Conversely, consistent support in equipment, training, and financial stabilization could enable Ukraine to preserve defensive positions and regain selective initiative. Other projections consider a mutual slowdown, where operational intensity decreases as both sides confront resource constraints. This could result in a de facto frozen conflict without a comprehensive political settlement. Diplomatic channels have explored temporary ceasefire frameworks. However, analysts caution that without enforceable security guarantees, such arrangements may remain fragile and subject to reversal. The most optimistic scenario envisions a structured peace process anchored by binding commitments and long-term reconstruction initiatives. Yet unresolved territorial disputes and strategic mistrust make this pathway complex in the near term. What emerges from these projections is not certainty, but probability. In 2026, endurance, institutional cohesion, and alliance durability may determine which of these trajectories becomes reality. As the year approaches, the conflict is defined less by rapid maneuver and more by sustainability, manpower capacity, technological integration, and alliance cohesion. The balance remains delicate, and the next phase could influence the broader European security architecture for years to come. The central question remains, which side can sustain its strategy longer? Share your perspective in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for continued in-depth analysis. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next report.